I'm going to go through some examples from national and international, so across Australia. Couple, or maybe one example that's not actually from energy, because there's learnings that you can learn from other industries that are a little bit more advanced. So extractive industry is a big one in Australia that we can learn from. Probably more the don'ts, but a little bit the do's lately. There's some better stuff going on. And I will start off with some things that we've learned from doing a lot of research. I have been working in this space since 2009, and Indigenous Energy Australia has been around since 2015, 2016, so we've been looking at this stuff for a while. So we've got a lot of learnings and a lot of understanding about different ways to work. The first one's a question, so this is more interest, and this is around the issues or the aspirations your communities have and face. And a lot of communities we talk to, energy isn't always number one. Often it's culture, land claims, health, employment. So is there anyone in the room that would say energy was their number one priority off the bat? That's number one you want to solve is energy? Yeah. Two of you? Yeah. All right. Yeah, so I think the way that we look at energy and what that question is how it can enable and what it can enable. So that's things like health, culture, income, education, internet, housing, careers. So cost of living is a big one. Reducing energy prices is a big one that we see. But the thing with energy that we've found and the projects that we see and the really good projects that we see is that energy is connected to everything and enables everything. There's energy in when we move, we're using energy. So energy is not just electricity pumping out of a wire, but it often is. And even if it's just electricity pumping out of a wire, it can, create a whole heap of stuff. So it can power lights that, kids can use to do homework later, and can power internet. Internet opens you up to the world, apply for jobs, all that type of thing. There's a whole heap of benefits that are associated with energy, reliable and clean energy. So it's a little bit of a different way of thinking about it. And we think about energy as more of a means, a way to get those outcomes that a lot of communities seek, rather than the final solution. And I think a lot of the way that people look at infrastructure, whether it be energy or water or transport, is this is all we need to do. We just need to build a solar farm and that's it. See you later. Done and dusted. But you need to think about what can it enable and what else is there. And they're the best projects that we've seen. There's not a lot of examples in energy of people doing that, but there's some examples in other areas of people doing that. And there's a few. So on that, so those things that back there, health, education outcomes and all those kind of challenges, and the position, I guess, social and economic position that all Aboriginal people find themselves in, it's going to take a while to get over and overcome. It's not going to happen overnight. And those outcomes and getting over those challenges are at direct odds that we see with the renewable energy industry. Like Tim was saying, the renewable energy industry is flying by, and like Ross pointed out, we don't want to miss out on it. So there's these outcomes and these challenges and these aspirations that communities are trying to achieve, and they're moving at this pace. And then there's this kind of flying by industry and it's going quick. And you talk about a single project on country or with a community, that's going to be done very quickly, and developers, they're a finely tuned machine and they're just trying to get that thing done and get out as quick as they can, because it's just costing them money. So there's this kind of conflict between the timeline of the actual outcomes that community want and the timeline of that developers and proponents and government want, and just that the industry's moving at. And even there's a climate change pressure, there's environmental pressure on all of us. So we talk about lassoing the rocket, and that's just saying we're moving at different speeds. So we try to avoid lassoing the rocket, and I'll explain how you might get around that kind of those two speeds that different things are moving on. And that's, we'll go there. So when we're talking about community goals and projects, sorry, I'll go back to that. So that lassoing the rocket, we're talking about, rather than tie everything to a project, what we've seen with projects that are done, rather than people trying to get everything done in one project, it's about a relationship. So you establish a relationship, whether it's with government or a company doing a project on your land, or whether it's the community doing a project themselves. Rather than trying to say, all right, we need to get everything out of in this project, you tie it to a relationship and long term, and the project kind of just, it's a big part of it, but it just fits into that longer timeline. So you're not getting all the jobs, you're not getting all the income, you're not getting all the health outcomes, you're not getting all the cultural outcomes just in that project, and it's how does the project kind of fit into the trajectory of the community. And this is what this slide's talking about. So you might have a project here and you have community goals. And you've got all these different lines linking it up. These are all different ways that a project might support these community goals. And what we found is the best projects, they really hone in on this connection point here, just one connection point, and they focus on, all right, this is what we're going to try to do, and this is the benefit we're going to try to get out of this project. And then you adjust the project rather than adjusting the community, because often what happens is a solar or battery comes in, or a mine comes in, or a roadway comes in. It says, yeah, righto, we can do, we've got these construction jobs, these 4 construction jobs. That looks good, we'll go give them to the community. It's not about what does the community want to do, how does the community want to be involved. It's, they've got their project, the project's concrete, and how does the community fit in with the project? Whereas this model is more about how does the project fit in with the community? How does it support the community's goals and the community trajectory? And doing projects like that has, in our opinion, and from the research we've done, seems to be the best way to do things and gets the best outcome and gets long-term outcome that's not just temporary. I'll go through some examples now. So this one is a really, really good example. This is a hydro example. It's from Canada. So renewable energy, community owned, TO owned even. And these guys are, this is by far the best example I've seen in the world of a renewable energy project. First Nations renewable energy project. So the first part of this project and how they got it over was they got a price for energy. Before anything was built, they hired in some contractors that were like-minded and were going to support them, and they went and talked to the energy provider, the retailer, and they negotiated a price, and they got actually above market. So they got more than you can usually get. And they leveraged some Indigenous targets or First Nations targets that the generator had, but they had a negotiation discussion, and from there they got someone basically to buy the power. So like Tim was saying, you get that finance for the next 20 or 50 years, someone's going to pay you for the power, and then from there they went and got a feasibility funded, and they again got in the right contractors, the people who may be like-minded and were going to work with community. And what they did when they were doing the feasibility, they developed up capacity within the community, so community could understand, and the community could do the next feasibility themselves rather than having to rely on contractors or consultants as much. And then again, they got the right contractors in, they built the thing, they started generating power. But what they did is they tried to get some employees, local employees, and they had real trouble with getting local employees. And they went, and rather than saying, oh, all right, we'll just get people in from wherever, they went and asked the community, what's going on? And the community said, oh, it's too much responsibility, because if power goes out, it's all on me and I'm the community person. So then what they did is in their pre-employment training, they built in a module, so they had like your pre-employment training that is similar to probably pre-employment you guys have encountered, a self-confidence module. And that's like, a bit left of field, but the participants said that was the best module. So it's about building self-confidence, being confident in yourself to even go and apply for a job, and then also to, not hold yourself responsible if the power goes out. And that was a really important thing that I've never seen done in any other project. And then the other thing that they did that's really important is they set up other businesses. So they went and bought construction equipment and set up a construction business. And energy can be pretty narrow, and there's only a few jobs. So there's only 4 jobs on this hydro plant in continuation. But what they did is they set up a construction company, and construction companies employ a lot more people than an energy company, and they got the equipment, so then they can kind of increase their employment and increase those long-term opportunities. So that was a really smart thing, and that's this energy enables everything. So energy can enable other businesses even, or other income streams. Ramakuk Solar Farm. So, Indigenous owned and operated solar farm in Victoria. A pretty interesting one. Again, they got some funding for the government, so there's this kind of valley of death. It's about getting a feasibility funded. So if you can get either price for power from an energy company, you can kind of leverage that and try to get stuff funded, or if you can get money for a feasibility and it feasibly stacks up, then it's easier to get a project funded. But they are the two big hurdles that you find, that initial funding. This community were lucky enough to get get a feasibility funded. It stacked up, and then they went and basically built a solar farm. And the idea is the solar farm will support a Ramakuk district health, but basically an Aboriginal health services organisation that was solely reliant on government funding, and they wanted to make sure that it wasn't just reliant on government funding. So again, what they did, they got energy, they enabled financial sovereignty or independence, so they're not just reliant on government funding. So again, they're using energy to enable a health outcome, an employment outcome, and they had education in there as well. So the really good example, Indigenous owned and operated. You see down here, capacity building, long-term partnerships, income stream, really good example. Gove Peninsula is another good one. So this is with Rio, and I know Rio probably don't have the best track record. And this, I'm sure there's heaps of stuff wrong with this project as well. But just some good kind of high-level lessons. They basically had the whole of the Gove Peninsula, which is a whole number of traditional owners dependent on a bauxite mine and bauxite refinery. So the whole community is dependent on it. And what they did is was pretty impressive. They set up the Nullarbor Corporation. Nullarbor Corporation just acted like a council, like a quasi-council. So they took bins away, they helped with water, they helped maintenance, they employed local people. So that was a pretty impressive thing to do, and that still exists. And there's a transition from mining that's going to happen because the mine's shutting down, the refinery's shut down. And what Rio have done, together with the Northern Territory government, have set up this thing called DEAL, which is like a non-for-profit, but basically that DEAL goes till 2035 and I think even 2050, and it focuses on how do we build capacity in the community, and they're putting money into it, significant money, like millions, to transition the community to other things. And they've also worked with TOs. There's a TO-owned mine now and a training centre now. So they're building capacity within the community, some with mining, but also transition away from that mining and build other businesses. So how do we kind of set up this community that was dependent on mines and move on to other stuff? And I've since read there's a whole heap of stuff with relationships there as well, but there is some good stuff out of that example. Hornsdale Wind Farm, this is a really good one, South Australia. Really good engagement up front. Is in a lot of guides of best practice, and then I called up a TO and he had a different story about whether it was best practice or not. So there's obviously a bit of a miss there. It's owned by a big French developer. They set up a nature reserve, particularly to look after a particular lizard they have that was culturally important. They put some artwork on one of the wind turbines, and the relationship was really good to begin with. Some of the kind of different things there were the community benefit fund. So they set up a community benefit fund. It was only targeted for energy efficiency, which wasn't exactly what the community wanted. There was a relationship, but it was with the native title holder, and that was one family or two families, and that's sometimes can be an issue representing the whole community. So there's an issue with community representation there, which I'm sure you have all encountered. How do you represent the whole of community? And sometimes, particularly companies, they want to do a deal, they want to get things working, they'll work with one group and they push through, and then others from the community can miss out. So an idea there would be to work with community to build community's capacity, or that representative body's capacity to represent all of community rather than just a couple of families or people, that type of thing. I'll move on from that one. I'm running out of time. This one's a really good example, Navajo Power in Navajo Nation, so across a few states. Now this is like a development, this is like a renewable energy company or solar company, which is First Nations owned, and they go around and they build community scale, they build utility scale, so they put basically solar on roofs of houses. A lot of them don't have power. And they also do big kind of utility scale projects, or are looking at doing big utility scale projects as well. So this is and it's a commercial organisation, but run a bit differently. So it's got stuff around minimum of 80% profits need to be redirected to community. There's stuff around executives can't be paid a certain amount above the lowest employee. So there's all these kind of governance and structures to make sure that it's a commercial organisation, but it's benefiting community. And again, it's about their big focus, and this is a really good example. Their focus is energy's impact on land and people. So how does energy enable, land to thrive and people to thrive, rather than let's just smack in a solar farm, or let's just put solar on these roofs and people can have cheaper power and save them a couple $100 a week. It's a couple $100 a year. How do we enable, and how do we kind of create jobs, and how do we improve all those outcomes and all those things that people might need help with? Again, this is another region that's probably similar to some areas in regional New South Wales where it was dependent on coal, and it's rapidly transitioning.
Okay, thanks, Michael.
Yeah, I'll wrap it up. So there's some key focus areas. This came from, there's probably 100 plus case studies we've looked at now. These are big things that we hear from community, that community want. So meaningful and ongoing relationships, cultural connection, so improving cultural connection and not having that erode, because a lot of communities we talk to, especially younger generations, they find that that's kind of fading away. Capacity development, we've talked about that a lot today. Long-term financial opportunities. So rather than just, a couple of jobs in construction, how does the community continue to have income coming in over the next kind of 20 years in a generational sense, rather than just a couple of people. And these last take homes don't lasso the rocket, so that's an important thing. So there's a real kind of conflict between the way that the energy industry is moving and a project's moving, and outcomes that I'm sure many of you guys are trying to chase. Long-term relationships tied to outcomes should be sought. Energy can enable everything and easily contribute to big ticket items. The stock standard stuff is important as well. So, some stuff seems like symbolism and that type of thing, but I think it's important to include that stuff as well as the big ticket stuff. I've already said that. So finding the funds for a feasibility is a really important step, or for someone to buy the power. This one comes to something that Shantae, I think, was talking about before: measure, and chase refunds. So upfront, contractualize. You have to do this. You have to do this. We have to see this in 5 years or 2 years' time. And if we don't, you can pay us and then some. Pay us out. If you don't do this program, this education program, we'll evaluate it. We know how much it's going to cost. And if it's $250,000 program over 5 years, you can pay us $250,000 plus the interest in 5 years' time. So put all that and hold companies to account. And you can do that in a contract if you're making that with a proponent. And then, we want generational infrastructure. So build infrastructure in a way that's not just going to provide outcome for the next 3 months, but provide outcome for the next 20 years, because the steel and the concrete is going to be sitting there for the next 20 years, even 40 years. So the benefits should be impacting you for as long as that piece of kit sits there.
Thank you.
My presentation is going to be a little bit more about an example, a discussion about what's happening in Canada, which is also where we got some inspiration for the network from, and then comparing that to Australia and talking about how some of those opportunities are kind of not transferring through, but the same companies are doing similar things in both in countries across the world. So this is a quote that comes from the Indigenous Clean Energy Network, the ICE, they're called, and they're like the sister organisation of the First Nations Clean Energy Network. They were set up in Canada about 10 years ago, I think. Got an amazing network across the country and really demonstrated the benefit of people coming together and talking about challenges and then working collectively to answer them. And so this is a post they put up on LinkedIn just before COP in Egypt last year, the Conference of the Parties about climate change. And it's just amazing. I mean, imagine if this was something that we could say in Australia, that Indigenous communities are the second largest clean energy asset owners and partners in Canada. Imagine if that was Australia. With thousands of small to large scale projects underway and ongoing, these projects have led to community training and job creation, reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, advanced gender equity, materially improved economic stability, cultural revitalisation and much more. So, I mean, it's a bit of a Hakuna Matata vision, right? It's something that we'd all like to be able to talk about. And I guess I want to talk about how they got there. So there was a study I found from 2017, so a few years old now, but back then they worked out that there were 152 medium to large scale community driven and owned renewable energy projects in Canada. And then over the next few years, another 50 to 60 that were going to be developed. So it's now 2023. You can imagine now that there's probably over 200 First Nations owned and controlled renewable energy projects of significant scale in Canada. And what ICE told us is the way they got there was by working with government to create incentives within policy frameworks, within regulation, to make sure that people could have those opportunities to build those projects. And I guess, you know, we've talked a little bit about jobs and benefit and businesses as procurement opportunities that people have to build into it. What happens if there were also targets that companies had to build in, if their purchasing power, that 100% of it has to be generated by First Nations businesses, by generators. So, you know, that's the sort of target that maybe we should all be asking for. So I guess, you know, again, coming back to policy and law, it's a bit dull. I hadn't heard section 42B, was it, for a while, but, you know, it can be useful in thinking about the system and the system we want to generate. That's how we can try and get there. And again, finance is really critical in all of that. So it's a pretty cool map that I found, and I don't think this has all 200 renewable energy projects in Canada, but it gives you a sense of where they are. So all over Canada, there are First Nations groups in remote, regional, urban areas that are owning and operating medium to large scale renewable energy projects. So these are not community-based ones. These are not just battery and solar panel on an outstation. These are large-scale, medium to large-scale renewable energy projects that are feeding into grids and supplying energy to large-scale customers.
Is there any in Australia?
Getting to that great question. Look at that. That is my map, and this is the first attempt at trying to encapsulate renewable energy projects in Australia that are First Nations led. I'm sure I've missed a few. Kathy told me that I've missed one just before in Balranald. But I'll walk through them and I'll give you a little sense of what people are doing. So starting up here in the East Kimberley, this is a project that is green hydrogen. It's going to be developing green hydrogen. It's a collaboration between Mirong Gadgeron Corporation, between Ballangara Aboriginal Corporation, between the Kimberley Land Council and then an advisory and funds management group called Pollination. And they've each got an equity share in it of equal parts, so 25, 25, 25, 25. And they're at the moment developing up a project. And they'll, you know, so developing up a project means pulling together lots of plans, getting approvals, selling it to investors. So there's nothing actually there at the moment. It's a concept, but it costs lots of money to develop up a project. So that's what they're doing. Hopefully they'll export it out of Wyndham, which is an old port that doesn't get much activity these days up there in the Kimberley. Coming down to the Pilbara, there's Yindyabarndi Aboriginal Corporation. So you might have seen recently, there's lots of talk of Twiggy Forrest, everyone's favourite Australian billionaire, being taken to court by the Yindyabarndi for failing to pay compensation for mines that he's built on their country without consent. And they are hoping to build a big renewable energy project to sell renewable energy to the mines in their district, but not to Fortescue. So they're looking to do that. Again, it's a concept. They've got investors. They've driven the project. They've got their advisors on board and so on. Next to it is Pilbara Solar, and this is a joint venture between Yamachi. I'm not even going to try and pronounce it. Yamachi Mala, something or other, Aboriginal Corporation, who are a native title representative body, and they've pulled together kind of a commercial arrangement to not build massive scale projects, but around about the 10 megawatt size, which is pretty big still, but not kind of the mega scale in that district. And then coming over here, we've got, I've forgotten the name of it, but it's on Mirning and Nudju country. I think it's the Western Green energy project. Les Schultz, who's on the steering committee for the First Nations Clean Energy Network, is a Mirning traditional owner and Nugju traditional owner. And this is going to cover 15,000 square kilometres of country, this one, and it's wind farms. And again, it's probably directed mostly towards supplying energy for production of hydrogen that will then be exported out of a port somewhere around there. Coming around here, this is on Bungala country. It's the Alara project, and they've used native title, their native title rights and interests and a determination to develop up a project on a block of land that they got handed back to them as freehold, so similar to what you guys have under the Land Rights Act, freehold land, and they packaged it up. That part of the world is really great for solar and wind, and Whyalla is just down the road, which is a major steel port for South Australia, and they make steel there, so they need lots of power, they need clean power, and so these guys are incredibly commercially savvy. And they've developed up this project. They talk about transmission lines, and they demand that if someone's building a transmission line that they get properly employed and that they must walk in front of every bulldozer that goes along, and it doesn't happen if that's not working. And Michael talked about the Hornsdale wind farm over the road on Nukunnu country, which is over here. They weren't getting paid. So the story I heard was that that wind farm was built, and there were meant to be positions in there for native title holders, and that company just didn't pay, and so that relationship fell apart. You can kind of see the sense, I think, of the collective action of the Bungala people, and they've got great advisors and great assistants kind of moving forward with that. Nukunnu took a different approach and didn't quite build that collective action with how they were approaching things. Michael mentioned Ramayak. I think it actually hasn't been constructed yet. It's still underway, and I think there's maybe some challenges with working out how to sell the power into the grid, because these sorts of things are really technical and they're tricky, and you need great advisors to help work that out. And then the project Kathy mentioned to me is up near Balranald.
Yeah, it's to the east of Balranald.
Yeah.
It's on a freehold property that's been acquired called Gay.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess I've got this map up here just because I find it overwhelming. Karina mentioned this morning the NEM, which stands for the National Electricity Market. And if you think about it, like governments, so the role of governments is to provide us lots of things, but electricity is one of them. And so they do these projections years into the distance about where they're going to need electricity from. And you know, we had, I think it was Chris presented a map this morning of renewable energy zones in this part of the world. You can see that one there. There's also one projected up around Broken Hill in years to come. And all of this is connected, so that if you're developing a project in this part of the world, you can connect into the national electricity market, which is highly regulated. So there's lots of rules around what you can build, where, how much energy it puts into it. So I wanted to put that up there to get a sense of you're being overwhelmed along with me, but also to show that this is all interconnected, and if you're in New South Wales, Victoria, Tassie, South Australia or Queensland, you're feeding into this grid potentially. I'm going to skip that because I don't think we've got time, but they're kind of projects that we're working on. This is something I think Amanda will probably get to in her talk, but I think planning and on a regional, local, community scale or Aboriginal nation scale is really important, and there's lots of frameworks around, I'm sure, and I think it's something that First Nations groups in Australia really need to get on with when it comes to renewable energy, and picking up with Michael's theme of putting people in the centre and then energy as a means for achieving what aspirations you want is a great one. This is something that I came across from that the ICE network in Canada shared with us. This is a kind of a tool that they're using up in the Arctic about working out what kind of the landscape is for energy around you, and then how you want that as a community to work for you and the different stages you go through. I'm going to finish on this map because let's imagine, you know, Canada looked like this 10 years ago. It was blank with very few dots on it. The First Nations there have shown that with collaborative action, with asking government for the right policy settings and really advocating for that, you can cover the country with First Nations-led renewable energy projects. And companies want it. They want to direct capital to that outcome. Let's try and make it all meet in the middle and cover the map.